we wrote this, right? This is our comprehensive solution to immigration and border security. And really, what it really says is three things. One is, you can't start out with amnesty. Wherever you are in this issue, whether you like DACA or whatever, we cannot start out by solving the problem by undermining the integrity of everything we're trying to do. You cannot start out by solving a problem by benefiting the people who made the problem. It just doesn't work that way. So we cannot start out with amnesty at all, let alone amnesty first. You also can't start out by doing a giant, massive bill. Because when Washington gets together and they try to solve everything in one big swoop, I can almost guarantee you they will make everything worse. Because all of the compromises, and you don't even know what's in that bill. And the third thing we said is, look, for the first time in decades, our government needs to actually take a serious look at legal immigration. Because the problems of border security and illegal immigration and legal immigration are all bound together. And we need a government that actually is willing to look at how people come to this country rightfully by bringing in people that will make this country stronger and better and who want to be here. And that's really the bottom line of the three things that we said. And we've had a president who has come to the table and actually tried to follow that path. So President Trump's done a couple of things, and I'll just run through that real quickly. First of all, he has given you a choice. We have never had a clearer choice on immigration than we've ever had in this election. The president has done everything possible to show that he's done everything he can do to try to fix the border, try to enforce immigration laws, try to close the loopholes, try to do things right. And regardless of if they won't give him money, if the court steps in, he wants you to understand that his notion is to make the system work. And the response on the left to that has been, let's do anything but Trump. Whatever he is for is we are against. And they can say they're not for open borders. They can say that all day long. But when you add up everything they want to do, they're for open borders. And I think that's great. I think it's great because Americans have never had a clearer choice. And your president has done that. He has given America an opportunity to give a mandate to one side or the other. And this administration has taken reforms really seriously. Well, I've seen, and the heritage experts have been in the White House, and we have seen the draft bills that this administration has put together to try to deal with these issues. On the one hand, looking at border security and immigration enforcement, and on the other hand, transformational immigration reform. If these bills pass, this would be the most consequential immigration reform in this century. And given that there's 80 years left in this century, that's saying a lot. So where are we? Well, I tell you right now, nothing is going to happen on immigration in the next 18 months. There's no way that Congress is going to come and the president are going to come together and do everything. And I think both sides are happy with that because both sides want that to be the issue we're all voting on. Both sides are willing to go to the box and say, let the American people decide. So I think there's a couple of things. One is we have about 18 months to let all of Americans know that the president's solution is not just something that conservatives want, it's something that's really the best for 320 million Americans. That the president has really put a plan on the table to really solve this problem. And the first thing I hope that we do, and we should all push the administration to do, is to put that legislation out there. Even though it's not going to get passed, put that legislation out there and let the American people see what they're voting on. And then one or three things are going to happen in November 2020. We might get President Trump back and get a Republican Congress. If that happens, she's excited. If that happens, I'm with you. I'm excited, right? Even though I'm nonpartisan, I'm excited. They're good elections. If that happens, this is nonpartisan. This is a historic opportunity to actually put together legislation that will transform, and I really think they will do that. So you have 18 months to build the momentum and then to push that across the finish line. Option B is if you have a Democratic president and one or two Democrats have Congress, they will try to put through the exact opposite and make things horrifically worse. And we will look to you and all of Americans to stand up and say, that's not what we want. This is really a time of choosing on this issue. On the one hand, we have never had a better opportunity to get this right. There's legislation sitting on a desk somewhere in the White House that will solve all the problems that make life better for every American. On the other hand, there are people that want to do the exact opposite of that. And the choice of what happens will get decided in a few months, and is decided about what do people really want for the future of their country. This is a tough issue, but this is one issue where we have the answer, and I do think we have the momentum on our back. And if we waste the next 18 months, then the fault is really on us. I love tough issues. There are lots of tough issues, and Heritage loves tough issues, and I love to go from this one to the next one, which is just as tough, maybe a lot tougher, which is healthcare reform. It's a tough issue, and we've got some great leaders in Heritage to tackle it. So let's roll the video and look at another trait challenge that we're going to face.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Owcharenko Schaefer, and I'm a senior research fellow at Heritage. I've been fortunate to be at Heritage for almost 20 years now, working on healthcare policy. And the one thing that gets me up every morning to come to work is the mission and the vision of the Heritage Foundation, and in particular, the vision for the healthcare team, which is really to give individuals more control over the dollars and decisions in their healthcare, not the government. That's almost the complete opposite of what we're hearing today if you turn on cable news on pretty much any network these days. The presidential candidates on the left are pushing a totally different agenda, an agenda that actually doubles down on the failures of the systems that you saw today and says, hey, it's failed for them, why not try it here as well? We see so much of what's been failing in healthcare across the board, whether it's in other countries and even in our country. But we have better ideas at the Heritage Foundation, and that's what we're here to talk about. What is the state of play? Well, one thing is, it's very interesting when you look back, one thing we all recognize now, and Heritage predicted it as expected, Obamacare is a failure. We knew that when they were trying to pass it. Now liberals realize it as they're now trying to double down on even more government control. Their attempt at it didn't go far enough. Now they're ready to really get into it. And that's why we're seeing the efforts today of the candidates across the board talking about Medicare for all, or even their distant relatives, but we call them the public options. The same idea of a Medicare for all single-payer system, but just more on the installment plan. Well, what are these things really about? Well, they're about getting rid of private health insurance as we know it today. And ironically, even in the Medicare for all plans, do you know what they're going to get rid of? They're going to get rid of even Medicare and the other government programs. So the whole idea of what the left is pushing now is actually just to say, we think the government can do a better job than you and I can do in our health care. And in a system that's moving in such a more personalized and radically different health care environment than we have 50 years ago, having the government try to make decisions, and a government in Washington, D.C. try to make personal health care decisions about our future, I think is a dangerous approach. So what has Heritage been doing? Well, we've been on the front lines as we always have. The first thing we've really been focused on is stopping efforts to have taxpayers continue to prop up what has failed in the system today, which is Obamacare. Billions of dollars members of Congress want to do to just keep it afloat. Let's just keep it alive a little bit longer until we can figure something out. Well, that's not really a solution. If it's broken, it's time to fix it. Second thing we've been doing is we've really been on the front lines of articulating and making the intellectual case against the Medicare for All movement, against single payer, and against the Trojan horse approaches that will still get us to a single payer system on the installment plan. And finally, and probably the biggest project we've been working on, is to lead a coalition to actually have a clear alternative to what the left is pushing, one that is a patient-centered healthcare system. And that effort has been pulled together through a proposal called the Healthcare Choices Proposal. It has three key components to it. The first thing it does is it pulls together the money that we have today that's in Washington and moves it out of Washington and gives it to the states. The second thing it does is it says, you know what, we need to give some regulatory relief to the healthcare system. Obamacare overregulated the healthcare system. So it begins to roll back some of the regulations that have caused premiums to go up and choices to go down. And then the last thing, which I think is the most critical piece of the whole proposal, is it says, if you're getting assistance from the government can't tell you where to apply it. You get to decide where you're going to put your health care assistance. You're not going to be enrolled in a government plan where they take the subsidies for you. We have a radical new approach to this, and I think it's very important. We've made a lot of progress on that. Today we have over 100 people who have signed on to the Healthcare Choices Proposal. That's at the national, federal, state, grassroots level have all rallied around this proposal. We also have had independent analysis look at it because, numbers do matter to some in Washington, maybe not all. And the proposal itself would reduce premiums by about 32%. So we're moving in the right direction. These are really critical down payments that we have for the healthcare system moving forward. We've also made some progress with the administration on this front and in Congress. For example, the president's budget from the beginning has included a concept that is very similar to what we've been proposing in the Healthcare Choices proposal. So we're thinking and rowing in the same direction. We also have members of Congress who have been eager to work with us on this. So we have several things that we're looking forward to moving ahead on this proposal. The first is we're really looking across Heritage to leverage all the great resources that Heritage has. So not just continuing with the research that we have going on and providing the intellectual data and making the case for it, but we're also working with our polling to make sure that we have updated numbers, because the more the American people learn about what the left is offering, the less they like it. I always say a bumper sticker like Medicare for All sounds really good. Until you begin to explain to people that means you lose the private health insurance you have today. Or if you're on Medicare, you'll be removed from the Medicare program as well. So the more people learn and the more people understand what's in the plan, the less they like it. We also are looking to continue to refine our communication and our messaging around that information so that as we learn what American people are listening for, we can actually make sure that what we're communicating is actually resonating with them. And finally, we've been working, as I already mentioned, with the administration and our allies in Congress to really build momentum around this to make this front and center for the next time Congress returns to health care. But that's the most important part, which is you and I. Everyday Americans really need to weigh in and make their voices heard on what they want to see as an alternative to what the left is pushing. It's not good enough to say we're for the status quo. We need something that's more radical than what they're offering, but that's more radical because it holds up to what the American people want, which is more personal control over the health insurance system, more personal control so that we hold the people in the healthcare system accountable, not let the government make the decisions for us. So that's the healthcare system that I'm very excited about. I always tell people sometimes you see videos like that and you get scared and nervous and it's doom and gloom. But I come in every day because I'm optimistic and I believe that the American people do know what the right system is for healthcare and that we're ready to be empowered and make those decisions on our behalf. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to another great area that the Heritage Foundation has been a wonderful leader on, and that's election integrity.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Hans von Spakovsky, and I know with that name you're thinking that guy's not from around here. It's true. I was actually born and raised in Alabama. I'm a senior legal fellow in the Center for Legal and Judicial Studies at the Heritage Foundation, which was started by Emcee, former Attorney General and close aide to Ronald Reagan. But I'm also the manager of the Election Law Reform Initiative. I've been there almost 10 years, and my experience in the election area is I worked at the Justice Department enforcing federal voting rights laws. I was a commissioner at the FEC for 2 years. But in addition to my legal experience, I've been on a county election board in 2 different states, Virginia and Georgia. So I bring practical experience to this area. But I also come at this from a personal standpoint. I'm a first-generation American. My mother grew up in Nazi Germany. My father was Russian, escaped the communists twice. And one of the things I remember from childhood stories from them was them saying to me how quickly and easily you can lose your freedom. And what you're hearing from our analysts in all these substantive areas, it's important that we elect representatives at the county, state, and federal level who are going to put in place the policies we want on everything from healthcare to immigration. But that's not going to happen unless we have fair elections that are secure and in which people can't cheat and steal your vote. Now, unfortunately, the Heritage Foundation is one of the only conservative organizations that's working on this issue. And we do it with everything from research to testimony before Congress and state legislatures to working with and briefing state election officials. In fact, I was in Texas just short of a decade ago. I was the first witness up before your Texas State Senate to testify in favor of the voter ID law that the legislature finally passed, and which it then had to fight in the courts for almost a decade to finally get in place. And that illustrates that the left, they don't want secure elections. They want it to be easy to cheat because they have fought every single reform intended to make elections better. And they've got a dozen organizations, advocacy organizations, who are out there constantly not only spreading lies and myths about this, but fighting every single state in the courts to stop these kind of measures from going in place, like the Texas voter ID law. Another example of this is this story you hear constantly. If you read the editorial pages of the Washington Post or the New York Times, they are constantly telling you there's no voter fraud in the U.S. We don't need to worry about it. Okay, well, in 2008, when the U.S. Supreme Court upheld Indiana's photo ID law, one of the first states in the country to pass a requirement like that, the court pointed out that, unfortunately, the U.S. has a long history of voter fraud. It's been documented by historians and journalists, and it could make the difference in a close election. And we have close elections all the time in this country, particularly at the state and local level. Now, we got so tired of hearing this constant story that there's no voter fraud in the U.S. that a couple of years ago we started a voter fraud database that we run in our legal center. It's the only database like this in the country. It's actually one of the most visited web pages at the Heritage website. And there's actually a lot of reporters now that apparently look at it when we look at who's visiting it. This is just a sampling of voter fraud cases from across the country. It's now up to 1,216 proven cases where someone's either been convicted in a court of law or a judge has ordered a new election, and they're from all over the country. And I hate to tell you this, but almost 100 of those cases are from Texas. And those Texas cases run the gamut of the way fraud is committed in this country. Everything from absentee ballot fraud to coercion and intimidation of voters, to bribery, to voter registration fraud, people claiming to live in a particular town or city in order to vote but not really living there, and vote buying. One of the cases, by the way, that's in our database on vote buying, the votes were being bought from voters with cocaine, cash, beer, and cigarettes, no barbecue. So what we've been doing is not only documenting this, because that's really important, and I can tell you this database has been now used by state attorney generals in defending lawsuits filed against them for putting in things like voter ID. It was put into a court record in Alabama when the state AG there was defending their voter ID law, and it's been used like that in other cases. The other big thing we've been doing is making recommendations to state legislatures and elsewhere on all the measures that should be used to clean up our election process. Voter ID, not just for in-person voting, but absentee balloting too. Requiring proof of citizenship when you register to vote. Again, I hate to tell you this, but many of the voter fraud cases in our database, and many in Texas, are non-citizens illegally registering and voting. The other recommendation we make are things like using jury information to clean up voter lists. People get called for jury duty from voter registration lists, and many of them are excused from jury duty when they say, well, guess what, I'm not a U.S. citizen. That information is never sent back to election officials, so the person can be taken off the list. Voter registration lists all over the country are not being cleaned up. There are literally hundreds of counties in this country that have more registered voters than the census says they have population. And the other thing that we've been doing is opposing measures being pushed by the left that would make things worse, like automatic voter registration, which registers people from databases, state databases, which is going to lead to non-citizens getting registered, to multiple registrations, same-day registration, which doesn't give election officials the ability to verify that somebody really exists, all kinds of things like that. So we only do that and are able to do it because of the support of the members of Heritage. So I thank you for that. And now we're going to hear about another big problem from one of the leading experts on the horrific spending problem that we have in this country, Romina Boccia. Thank you.
Out of control federal spending is threatening to undermine the opportunity and prosperity, not just for the future generation, but for our generation today. It is threatening to rob us of many freedoms, as out-of-control spending is fueling the growth in the federal bureaucracy and Washington getting into all sorts of affairs that it has no business meddling in. My name is Romina Boccia. I'm the director of our new Grover Herman Center for the Federal Budget. At the Heritage Foundation, we just launched this center last fall because federal spending is getting so much out of control, but we also have a greater opportunity than ever before. And our team of experts, we work every day to preserve opportunity, prosperity, individual liberty, and economic freedom by limiting the size and scope of government, and we're guided in that exercise by the US Constitution. And our flagship product, you might have seen some copies outside, is the Blueprint for Balance. We are the only organization in Washington that puts together a fully fleshed out budget proposal that presents Congress and the administration every year with a plan to balance the budget, keep taxes low, fully fund national defense, and grow the economy. And this was the budget proposal that President Trump used when he first came into office to put together his budget. So it's no surprise then that we had more than 2/3 overlap with our proposals, some of them being copied directly into the president's budget. And in the Congress, we've also seen progress in the right direction. The Republican Study Committee, an organization of members in the House, has put forth a budget proposal that closely matches ours. And we work with these members of Congress and their staff on a daily basis, advising them on legislation, educating them about policy, giving them the facts that they can use when they go on television to talk to their constituents and other citizens about why these policies are so important. That is the critical work that we're able to do because of your help. And it is so critical today because spending is deeply unsustainable. And one of the ways that we pay for this spending already today is with interest costs. And the interest on our national debt is actually going up. In the past 2 years, the amount of interest that we're paying on the national debt, I bet you hadn't heard this before, grew by over 1/3. Imagine your mortgage interest grew by over 1/3 in just 2 years. We're now paying $400 billion in interest every year, and that number is going up, and it's going up rapidly. And that money is money that's not available to fund core national priorities, and right now we're borrowing a large portion of that money. But we don't just pay for the debt with interest. We also pay for it today because it drags down our economy. When debt gets to a level where it approaches the size of an economy, and especially if it's on an upward trajectory, it reduces growth, which translates into less opportunity, fewer jobs, higher interest rates, and less of an ability for the American people to build financial security to provide for themselves and provide for their communities. And that is what the left is exploiting. We just saw the recent budget deal that was made in that last video, and that was really bad. It's been getting worse. Members of Congress have, in ignoring the president's budget proposal, and putting together deals that are blowing spending even further out of control. So we're moving in the wrong direction. We had a law that was adopted in 2011, the Budget Control Act, that came about with the rise of the Tea Party, because people were fed up with Washington's ways and fed up with the bailouts. Well, Washington is talking about bailouts again. They're talking about bailing out private union pensions now. What's after that? We have state and local governments that are deeply indebted. So that budget deal was really bad, but if we don't put controls on Washington, if we don't put checks on Washington and stop this spending, it could get much, much worse. And how much worse? Well, I am actually from Germany. You might have heard a little bit of an accent, and we crunched the numbers. If we don't stop the left's assault on America and the promotion of European-style welfare programs in the United States, whether that be a government takeover of healthcare, a government takeover of our college education system, the Green New Deal, jobs guarantees, paying people who don't want to work, on the low-end estimate, it would more than double the size of our federal budget, adding about $50 trillion over 10 years to federal spending. But the proposals that the left is putting forth to pay for this, financial transactions tax, a 70% highest marginal tax rate, those proposals would barely provide about $3 trillion in additional revenue. So where's the rest going to come from? We cannot tax the rich. There's not enough money if you just tax the rich. If we took every single penny from people making more than $200,000 annually in the United States, it would barely raise $3 trillion. We'd be short of $3 trillion, and that assumes they don't get to keep any penny of their own money. So there isn't enough money there. So it would be middle-class tax hikes. That's what it would look like. Coming back to Germany, someone making $40,000 in Europe, including in Germany, pays $6,000 more in taxes every year to their government than does the same person earning $40,000 here in the United States. That is a huge difference. Someone making $100,000 in America today, if they lived in Europe, they would pay $16,000 more in taxes every year, because you cannot fund a European-style welfare state without a European-style tax system. And that would be a vast reduction in freedom. It would be a vast overreach of the federal government, which isn't particularly good at managing the pool of money that we've given them. So we must stop by putting controls on Washington, because only when we keep Washington in check will American families prosper. Only if we can't keep Washington in check will people be able to get the reward and the dignity that comes from working and to be able to provide for themselves and their families, and will we have strong communities and a civil society that comes together to solve problems at a local level. Because Washington cannot replace mother, father, daughter, sister. They try, but they provide a very bad substitute indeed. So I'm asking you tonight, will you join us to put Washington on a firm budget, keep taxes low, and preserve the great tax cuts that President Trump was able to secure that have fueled this boost in the economy, where a family, a married couple with 2 children, they got a $3,000 tax cut in 2018. And we have unemployment numbers, they haven't been this low in 50 years. It's been a tremendous success, but we can only preserve them if we control spending in Washington. So thank you for your support, and thank you for all you do for this great country.
Romina, Hans, Nina, Jim Carafano. Believe it or not, these are just 4 of over 100 such policy experts that I get to work with every day at the Heritage Foundation. You name an issue, we have somebody there that knows it inside and out. So thank you guys very much for what you do. Now, one of the things, as many of you know, that's different about Heritage than many other think tank organizations is beyond just coming up with good ideas, crafting good policy ideas, we actually take them and say, all right, how do we turn these into reality? How do we actually take these ideas and actually try to make the lives of all Americans better? Ed Fulner, who was our founder at the Heritage Foundation, has true saying, it's also a great saying, which is there are no permanent victories in Washington, just permanent battles. You win, and then the other side comes back. You win, and the other side comes back. So we are constantly, day in, day out, fighting the good fight in these permanent battles. And two of my colleagues that lead efforts at Heritage in doing that are Tommy Binion, our Vice President of Government Relations at Heritage, and Janae Stracke, who heads up grassroots efforts for Heritage Action for America. So please welcome them to the stage. So we're going to talk a little bit first about some of the successes that we've had to date, and then where we're actually going from here, and where we think we're going to see some positive inroads. So Tommy, let me begin with you. And this was touched on a little bit by Romina when she talked about the budget. But early on in the administration, Heritage made a lot of recommendations, both on the budget, on regulations. I mean, you named the area of the government. We had some recommendations when the Trump administration showed up for the first day. It's like, here's what you should do. Tell us, we've been thinking about it for a few years. Tell us where we are on that.
Well, I think that's a really good point, that we had been thinking about it for a few years, right? So there was this 8-year backlog of good conservative ideas ready to be implemented. And the morning after election night in 2016, what we had been planning for had now come true. We had a conservative in the White House, a conservative majority in the House, and a conservative majority in the Senate, and there was work to be done. So Heritage has a great history of publishing recommendations for the government. The most important product we do that in is called the Mandate for Leadership. We first published the Mandate for Leadership in late 1980, just before President Reagan took office in January of 1981. And we published another mandate in 2016 that was for the next conservative president. Once that mandate was released, it was actually 5 different volumes, north of 1,000 recommendations. Once that mandate was released, we gave it to every single person employed by the Trump administration, by the Trump transition, by everybody going into government had that document. We pushed those recommendations for a year, and after the first year of the Trump administration, we looked at every single recommendation that they possibly could have gotten to in that first year. We looked at who would have been responsible. Was it the assistant secretary for this, or the undersecretary for that, or was it a White House office that could implement and embrace this recommendation? We called that person up, we asked for a meeting, and we said, we want to tell you about this recommendation. And after all those meetings had taken place, we looked and we saw that President Trump had embraced 64% of the recommendations that we had made. And we thought that was pretty great. The president thought that was pretty great.
If I recall, Tommy was on Fox one morning talking about this, and then interestingly, the president tweeted out something about what Tommy was talking about.
Yeah, that was a shot of adrenaline, which I'm not sure I would recommend that experience for anybody. But and the really exciting thing, and I'll end my answer to your question with this, is what I have been working on this summer, and what all of these research analysts have been working on this summer, is the 2020 version of that mandate. So the first draft is done. We cannot wait to publish this document. These are the recommendations we would make to President Trump or whomever the president is in his second term, in the term coming forward. So we're really excited to publish that as well.
Janae, for those here who, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with Heritage Action for America, but tell us a little bit about the background here, because I think it's important. People know, look, Congress has a lot of opinions, and we send a lot of good recommendations over, but it's interesting how elected officials work. If they don't hear from their constituents, they tend to ignore a lot of good advice and opinions, and that's where the grassroots comes in that you work with.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And first of all, let me say thank you for having me here tonight. I'm really thrilled to be here in Texas. I've actually been in Texas for a little while because I hosted an event with my grassroots. I've been doing regional events, and we held one in Austin and had almost 200 of our activists come to that on Saturday. And those are the kind of activists that I get to work with, and you're exactly right. The point that you touched on, our office, Heritage Action, gets to work very closely with Tommy's office. We have our own government relations team that's on Capitol Hill on a daily basis, building relationships with those offices, the chiefs of staff, the other staffers, and building those relationships. But at the end of the day, Our government relations team is not going to be able to march into their office and say, Congressman, Senator, here's what I want you to do, and they're just going to automatically do it. That's not how it works. But when we have our grassroots call them and say, Senator, Congressman, here's what I want you to do, their ears perk up, their heads turn, and they want to hear what you have to say. And we've seen that happen time and time again. I've seen it work. And that's one of my favorite things to tell people as I travel across the country and work with grassroots, is to remind people the power that their voice has. It's really easy to feel voiceless and hopeless watching things play out before you. But when the people work, the system works. And when you use your voice, it really does have an impact. I mentioned our government relations team already, and I just want to say, our current director of government relations actually worked on Capitol Hill for nearly a decade in a few different offices, and he's a huge asset to our team, great wealth of knowledge. And something that he shared with me was that he said, there are a lot of really great organizations around town that do great work, some different than what we do, and that's valuable. But he said, when Heritage Action called our office, I always wanted to know what you had to say. We really cared about what Heritage Action had to say, and he knew it was because of where we stood on policies, that we have a trusted reputation and the work that the foundation does, that we're able to take the policies that you just heard from all these wonderful experts, and we're able to make it a reality through Congress.
Tommy, talk a little bit about what happens when we get ideas like the pathway for immigration reform that Jim Carafano talked about earlier, healthcare choices proposal that Nina talked about. How does it work in terms of getting it in front of the right people within the administration to actually get these reforms moving?
So it starts long before the document is published, long before we finalize a research paper. We try to create a culture of conservatism in Washington, and that's a real challenge. It's hard to say that with a straight face because we are up against a steep climb in Washington, D.C., but we try to create a culture of conservatism amongst the members of Congress, amongst the President's administration, and amongst the thousands of staff members that are there. We do this with the fellowships that you've heard about in the slideshow before the presentation. We do this with new member orientation. Any member of Congress that is elected comes through a 2-day new member orientation at the Heritage Foundation. We do this through out-of-town retreats and conferences with members of Congress. We create an understanding of the right ways to govern. We try to put a vision for a conservative government in their mind. And then we have a keen understanding of how the legislative process works, right? Timing and location is everything. And so if you get an immigration paper and you're in the middle of a spending fight, it might go in the round file. But if you get an immigration paper 2 days before a really important committee hearing on that subject, you're probably going to devour all 20 pages of it, so you're ready to ask questions. So we understand exactly what members of Congress and their staff and administration officials are going for, and we try to match our outreach to that. And this works really, really well. Jim mentioned the meeting in the White House where the president's team, the team that has written the president's immigration plan, wanted to have us in to review the text of it. And so there was about 8 of us sitting around a table in a conference room in the White House, and we've got a big binder full of the president's immigration plan here, and we've got the Heritage immigration paper here, and we're comparing and we're going through page by page, and the administration officials had read our paper, and we'd say, hey, what about this? And say, yeah, we know, we read that in your paper. And so it's really great how that works. Once you form the relationships, once you've put yourself in the right location at the right time, a Heritage research paper can have a really, really outsized impact.
And Janae, talk too about, in addition to the research paper and the like, knowing, as Tommy said, about how the process works, especially on the Hill. And it doesn't mean that you're going to win every legislative battle, but just getting something passed isn't the only way to claim victory. Talk about what you guys did on the Born Alive legislation.
Yeah, absolutely. So for everyone who isn't familiar, the bill is the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. And this bill purely is to mandate that care is given to a child born alive after an attempted suicide or attempted abortion. So we say it doesn't matter if the child was born in a hospital or an abortion clinic, they still deserved care. This seems like common sense. And Nancy Pelosi, Speaker Pelosi, is obviously not going to put this on the floor because it's not beneficial to her. So what the strategic play on this is to try to force the hand to get this onto the floor, and the way to do that is through a discharge petition. So that's a strategy tactic that we use when we know, okay, we're not in the majority in the House. So what can we do? And we're going to use strategies like that. We're going to play the game to move these things forward and to get members to sign this discharge petition to force a floor vote on something that is so crucial and so important. And we had 60 people our activists fly up at the last minute. We had no control over the timing, so I think we notified them the week before and said, hey, can you come up? We're going to lobby on Capitol Hill. And I'm telling you, the people I work with are so passionate. Some of you are in the crowd. You guys care about America. You care about the future and these issues. And they took off work, they bought flights, and they came up, and we spent an entire day lobbying on Capitol Hill. And it really does make a difference. We had 3 people sign the discharge petition that day. We have Democrats that have signed on, and we need to get 17 more still. But this is an evergreen issue, and we're not going to let up. We will hold their feet to the fire.
Amen. And of course, in addition to the legislative efforts, our government relations efforts, we also have the marketing efforts from the communications team. So how many of you read the Daily Signal on a regular basis or get the Morning Bell? Oh, good. And for those of you who don't, we can work on that too. As I said, we're going to get to that in other parts of the program. But the reason I bring up that is because it's another way, Heritage has often said it's great to have the policy ideas. You want to get them in front of the right folks in terms of the members of Congress or elected officials. You want to get them in front of their staffs. But we want to get them in front of the American people. Because when they have the information and they see how individual policy issues actually affect them, they have more impetus to actually take action themselves. So things like the Daily Signal that we work on a regular, which is the Daily Signal, is Heritage's multimedia platform. This was launched 5 years ago, and just this year we hit 100 million views. 100 million, which is a huge impact. But then we also have the social media platforms: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and I know many of you play in that space as well. And I just want to throw out one interesting and kind of fun fact on Twitter. So when you look at who members of Congress follow, more members of Congress, this is Republican and Democrat, more members of Congress follow the Heritage Foundation than any other organization or persona except for one person, at Real Donald Trump. But that's okay. We'll take number 2 in that particular lineup. So, but again, I think that shows impact because people want to know, even those on the left, what are they saying? What are they putting out there? And that's a great space to be in. Go ahead, Janae.
I just was going to say, which would confirm exactly what our government relations director said, that people on the Hill care about what Heritage has to say. And that's a fact that confirms it.
And a big reason they care is because we have over 500,000 members around the country, and that makes a huge, huge impact. Tommy, we have just a few minutes left, and I want to kind of look forward. There's some issues that we haven't talked about, one of which I know is what's important all over, but it's certainly important in this state, and that's the Second Amendment. And what came out of the recent tragedies in El Paso and Ohio, there was a lot of talk, are we going to have new background checks? Are we going to have new regulations? Where is that right now? And you just came from a meeting at the White House last week on this. Talk a little bit about what's been talked about.
So I mentioned that timing is everything, and you asked me to look forward. This is going to be in the immediate future. The nation's gun policy with respect to the Second Amendment is at some significant degree of risk for changing in September of 2019. And I don't want to sound the alarm or sound like Chicken Little, but this is a serious threat. As a nation, we experience these tragedies together. They are visceral. They're on our TV screens. And so the human inside of us wants to do something about that, and our politicians are no different. But they turn to legislative proposals. They turn to proposed laws that won't address the problem. And that's what has us so concerned. Even the president is considering policy options that won't address the problem. He's looking at universal background checks. which is another one of these policies that as a bumper sticker sounds okay, but in real life is really problematic. You already have to go through a background check to purchase a firearm in this country. I'm going to tell a story that illustrates what's wrong with universal background checks. It'll just take me a second. I met my wife freshman year of college, and I fell in love with her. And junior year, I got invited on a really special hunt. It was a duck hunt with some of my friends in college, and I asked her dad if I could borrow a shotgun. And he said yes, and I took it out, and I shot lights out, and I cleaned it as best I could, and I gave it back to him. And we were at dinner that night, and I was telling him how well I shot with it, and he said, buddy, it's yours. And that was a really special moment for me. That would have been illegal for universal background checks. Private transfers of firearms would be illegal under the proposal's H.R. 8 for universal background checks. So we're going to fight like crazy in this moment against anything that, one, infringes on your Second Amendment rights, but two, won't solve the problem. And I think it's really important that Heritage is there. We all know what's happening at the NRA. We're all very concerned about that. And it's really important that we Heritage Foundation plays an outsized role in this particular Second Amendment fight. Congress is going to come back in session early from August recess in the House to look at this. And we're going to be there in the right time, in the right place, with the right research to fight that fight.
Janae, I want to give a shout out to Heritage Action. They did some recent polling looking at what are the issues that matter most to people going into 2020, and one of the issues was immigration. And what they found, and how many of you watch the president when he does rallies around the country? Yeah? Okay, a few of you. If you noticed last week, when he was talking about immigration, he started talking about the fact that one of the biggest problems with illegal immigration is that people coming to this country are using the social services that should be used by and for American citizens, right? I don't think it's any coincidence that he started talking about that right after a survey came out from Heritage Action showing that that actually mattered more to Americans than even the MS-13 and the threats that you see in other parts of illegal immigration. More Americans actually cared about that factor than anything else. Somebody put it in front of him and he started talking about it, which is great. But give you the last word in terms of what you're looking ahead for with Heritage Action.
Yeah, well, I mean, you just touched on it. So the polling that we did was to find out, who elected Donald Trump in 2016, why, and where do they stand today? What are the policy issues that are going to carry us into 2020 and get us through the election, presidentially, states, locally? And that was the policies that we wanted to put out to equip people to know, where do we need to fight? Where can we win?
And how to talk about it.
Exactly. And I'll just close on this. What's so unique about our program, so we do a weekly call updating people on what's going on, and each one of our sentinels, those what we call our activists, are building personal relationships with their members. And that goes a long way because you're not just a name on an email list, you're not just signing a petition, you have a relationship with that office and they respect your opinion. It goes a really long way.
Ladies and gentlemen, please help me thank Janae and Tommy as well.